Now that we've set up our flat lays and we've taken some photos in our past couple of videos, it's time to edit those photos. Now, even if you think that your images look pretty good straight out of the camera, almost every photograph can benefit from just a little bit of minor tweaking here and there. So all we're going to focus on today are very basic adjustments. So we'll go over cropping, adjusting the tone, and making sure that the color balance and the saturation are where they need to be. So these are pretty basic things that should be in any image editing software. We'll be using Photoshop, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with. So let's pull up our photos and take a look. So now I have all of our photos that we took in our flat lays earlier loaded onto the computer. I've already gone through them and I've picked out my favorites. So let's pull them up and take a look at what we have. So we'll be using Photoshop. You can use whatever image editing software you're comfortable with. And I'm going to start in Bridge. So this is what I use to organize all of my files. And so like I said, I've already gone through and picked out my favorites. These are the 3 that I have it narrowed down to. So I have one of each flat lay and then one that we did in the light tint. So let's start with the one that we did in the light tint, since that's just a very simple plain white background. Cool, so it already looks pretty good. We started with a very clean exposure. We had a clean background, so there's really not even a whole lot to do there, but it could definitely use some cropping. So let's go ahead and cut in here. Now you can use the crop tool on Photoshop. It's over here in your toolbar. Crop tool, or if you use your shortcuts, it's C. Hit C on your keyboard. Now I have this set to a 5:4 ratio. We are trying to stay horizontal today. I'm trying to go by what is considered the standard for Etsy, just because it's the most common selling platform. But if you have another dimensions that you need to stick with, go ahead and use those. So I'm just going to crop in nice and tight here. There's a lot of white space that we don't really need in this image. So right about there. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just going to use my keys on my keyboard to nudge it around a little bit until I'm really happy with it. And I like that. So let's go ahead and say okay. And I think that looks pretty good already. One thing that I would like to do is come in here and adjust our exposure and our colors just a little bit. Even though it's pretty much on point, I think we can enhance it just a little bit more. So I'm going to use an adjustment layer. Whenever you're editing, it's always a good idea to create another layer. That's referred to as non-destructive editing. So that just means that any changes you make right now, you can go back and you can change later. So say I bump up the saturation a little bit too much, and a few steps down the road, I say, I think I took it a little bit too far and I want to scale that back. I can always go back to that specific layer and I can either remove it or I can tone it down without having to undo all of those other things that I've done in between. So I'm going to start with levels. So levels is nice if you're not too familiar with Photoshop. It gives you this histogram that tells you where all of your tones lie in the image. So this is where your highlights are, these are your midtones, and this is your shadow. So since this is mostly a white image, there's a lot of white space here. That's why you see so much information over here on the white end. But there's still a little bit of a gap here, so I'm going to take this little slider. So that's telling me that my white points can come up just a little bit brighter. So I'm going to bring that up to right about there, right where the edge is. I think we can even bring in a little bit more contrast. So let's take this shadow slider up here and bring it down just a touch. Yeah, there we go. See, that really helped deepen, especially this shadow right in here, and kind of helped make the outline of these little beads here nice and crisp. So just a quick before and after. It's a very minor difference, but it just makes it a little more punchy. Now I'm also going to go back over to my adjustments panel, and I am going to use the Hue and Saturation tool to make another layer. I just want to bump up the saturation a little bit, especially since these are probably going to be used in an online platform. You want to bear in mind that you will probably lose just a little bit of saturation once you upload them to the internet. So I always oversaturate everything just a little bit if they're going online. So in this case, I don't think I quite took it far enough, so I'm going to bring it up to maybe about 25. Let's see where that takes us. Here we go, that's nice and punchy. Now, in person, this is a really bright and colorful bracelet, so I want to make sure I do it justice. So I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and save this image. We're going to save this as a JPEG. And let's go ahead and title this B, just so I have the originals to go back to, just in case we want to compare them a little further down the road. Okay, so we've already done that. We've saved our changes in a different file, so we'll hit no and close out. So let's go back to Bridge. Okay, so there we can see there's our edited file. Now let's go in and take a look at this next flat lay that we did. So this is the one on the white marble. Now immediately we can see that this one needs probably a little more help than the last one. It is a little bit underexposed. We're not quite getting the tones that we should in the bracelet. So let's punch that up a bit. Now, and one thing that I'm using a lot here is the zoom tool. It is Z on your keyboard. That allows you to zoom in just a little bit so you can take a closer look at some of this detail. You can zoom out by holding the Alt key. I am on a PC. It will be a little bit different if you're on Mac. So this is the tool that we're using here, zoom. I'm zooming in, then zooming out by holding the Alt key. So we're just going to do pretty much the same thing that we did to the last image, come in here with our levels. Yeah, see we have a lot more distance here between our highlight slider and our histogram. So let's go ahead and bring that up. Yeah, that's already looking better. And take it even a little bit further. Okay, we're starting to lose a little bit of detail right in here, but I'm actually not too worried about that. I think it looks pretty okay, and we really want to focus on the bracelet here. So we don't want to take it too far, but I'm okay with losing just a little bit of information in this case. I think we can bring up our midtones a little bit too, because I'm a little bit concerned about losing some of the detail in the beads. Let's brighten that up. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. You know what, I'm even going to go into our shadows and just bring that down just to make that look a little bit more crisp. Okay, so just so we can see a before and after of our levels adjustment. So that's before, that's after. Already a big difference. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the hue and saturation. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Increase the saturation a little bit. I think we went up by about 25 in the last image, so let's do about the same here for consistency. So we can see a before and after. Especially look up here in the gemstones and in the bracelet, you can really see as I click this layer on and off how it's affecting it. The last thing I want to do is come in and crop. Once again, we're sticking with that 4:5 ratio. So we are trying to do a consistent edit on all three of these images since these would probably go together as a set. We do want them to look pretty consistent. I'm going to crop in nice and tight. See how that looks? I like that. I think I might have even come in just a little bit too far. And it's okay to come in here and play, especially in Photoshop. There's this option up here to click delete cropped pixels. I keep it unchecked because once you go in and crop, sometimes I feel like I went a little bit too far and I like to bring it back out. So that gives you the flexibility to do that. I always like to leave myself as many options as I can. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I notice one little thing that I do want to fix. There's a tiny imperfection on this gemstone up here. Normally I'd probably let it go, but this is a pretty good opportunity to show you another tool. It's called the healing brush. So I'm going to create a new layer by taking my base layer here, that's layer 0, clicking and dragging it down to this little icon. This little plus icon is the new layer button. So if I drag this layer down to it and release, it'll create a new layer. So this is just a duplicate copy of this layer. So now I'm going to go in with my healing tool. That's going to be shortcut is J, or it's this little band-aid icon over here on your toolbar. And we're just going to use the spot healing brush tool. That's usually the easiest one to deal with. I feel like this brush is just a little bit bigger than what I need since I'm just doing this tiny little area right here. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller by right-clicking and adjusting the size. You can also use your bracket keys on your keyboard. I think that's probably going to be, yeah, that's going to be good. So let's hit enter and accept that. And just click and paint. Here's a before and after of that. Again, that's a very, very minor fix, and it's probably something that I wouldn't even do normally, but it's a good opportunity to show you another tool. So I'm pretty happy with the way that this image has turned out, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. So I'm going to File, Save As, and I'm just going to make this a JPEG for the purposes of this tutorial. I'm going to say B. Those are all my edits. And we'll close out of this one. Okay, so going back to Bridge, we just have one image left. So let's open that one up. Okay, it's pretty similar to the last one. It just has that purple background instead of the white marble. I can see that I didn't quite get enough coverage with the purple paper over here, but that's okay because we're probably just going to crop it out. So before we do anything else, let's go ahead and take care of that crop. So again, you can use this little icon on your toolbar, or you can hit the C button on your keyboard. I'm just going to bring in my corners. I'm not worried about coming in too tight because I do want to make it nice and close. And I think that actually looks pretty good. I am trying to keep the bracelet in the center of the image. Anytime you're using an online platform to sell your jewelry, sometimes they'll automatically create a thumbnail for you. Say somebody searches for a Swarovski amethyst bracelet and this shows up in the results. This whole image might be what shows up on my seller page, but if they decide to use certain dimensions for the thumbnail, then they could automatically crop in to the center of the image. So if you have an image that's, say, left weighted or right weighted, say this is what your image looks like. Say you have it there and they automatically decide to create a thumbnail out of the center of the image, then you're only going to get this much of the bracelet in. So part of it's going to get cropped out. So for that reason, if you're using this for an online selling platform, I would try to keep everything as close to the center as possible. Otherwise, feel free to get creative with it. I'm going to click OK. I'm pretty happy with the way that that looks. So now we're going to do the same thing. Once again, you guessed it. We're making a new layer for our levels. So we're going to bring that up. We've got a lot of room. Once again, this one was pretty underexposed, which is okay. So we can just brighten that up a bit. Now I feel like our highlights are looking pretty good, but I think our midtones need a little bit of help. So I'm going to bring those up too. Yeah, that's looking good. Yeah, it just brightens it up and just gives it some life. Especially with a piece like this that just has this kind of inner luminance to it almost. I just love photographing pieces like this. So, okay, now that I've gone in and played with this a little bit, let's look at a before and after. Yeah, that looks kind of dingy. That looks much better. Okay, let's do the same thing with Hue and Saturation. I really want this one to pop since it's on this purple background. I just love that background. Purple's my favorite color. Let's bring that out, yes. Again, it might look a little bit too bold, but it will lose a little bit of pop to it. The colors won't be quite as saturated most of the time whenever you upload them, so I always like to go a little bit further than I would normally. Now I do see, again, there's this teeny tiny little spot over here on my background that's kind of bothering me, so I'm going to go in with my healing brush tool. So since we are making an adjustment to this layer, I want to duplicate this layer. And I want to come in here with my healing brush tool. So grab your Band-Aid and just click. And there, it's gone. And I'm actually going to clean up this tile a little bit too. I see a couple of teeny tiny white spots. I'm getting a little bit nitpicky here. I would let this go otherwise. I probably wouldn't even look in that. But the one thing that I'm noticing now that I've zoomed in a little bit further is since I upped the saturation, I'm getting this kind of weird blocking in the purple colors up here. So let's see if I can tone that down a little bit by using vibrance instead of saturation. So I'm going to turn this off for a minute. Let's go back to our adjustments panel and let's find a vibrance layer. So I did mention this in the phone editing video, but if you missed that one, just an overview of the difference between saturation and vibrance. Saturation is a global adjustment to color, so it will increase all colors. If you increase the saturation, it will increase all colors equally. Vibrance, however, will specifically target the colors that are a little bit more muted in an image, and it will bump those up a little bit more to meet the same level as the saturated ones. So in this case, since this is a very intense kind of saturated color, maybe by using the global adjustment, we're bringing it a little bit too far and it's kind of starting to block up on us over here. So let's see if we can do a little bit better with vibrance. So I'm clicking on my vibrance layer and I'm just going to bring that up a little bit. I think it is doing a little bit of a better job handling all of this up here. Okay, so turning it on and off, very subtle difference, but I think that giving that little tiny boost there of the vibrance before we go in with the saturation is going to help. So the vibrance layer actually has a saturation slider in it as well, so instead of creating another new layer, we're just going to go ahead and use that one. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just adjusting that slider and bringing it up a little bit, and I am happier with that result. I think that looks pretty good. Let's look at a before and after. Before and after. Even bring that up even just a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. Before and after, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now I see one more little dot that I kind of want to take care of here, so let's hit that with our healing brush tool. Done. Okay. We'll zoom out. And this is our last image, so we're going to go ahead and save this one. And again, in this case, we're saving it as a copy. I am not bothering to keep these layers here. I'm just going to keep this as a JPEG. Normally I would, but since this is just an example for you, I'm going to go ahead and flatten them and keep this as simple as possible. So you do always want to make sure that you can keep your image quality as high as possible. So always keep it at a 12 maximum unless you need a smaller size for whatever reason. But it's always easier to size a file down and make it smaller from a larger file than it is to size up. So always make sure that you're storing it at maximum quality and you can adjust it later if you need to. Cool. Done. We already saved that, so I'm going to hit no and close out. Let's go back to Bridge. Okay, so let's pull all of these up together. These are our 3 images. This is where we ended up. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can bring all of these up together. So we have our 2 flat lays. and our light tent photo. So one thing that I'm noticing now that I'm looking at all of these together is since it was shot in a different setting, it's a little bit warmer. The light tent image is a little bit warmer, so I can go in and adjust that. So let's do that. I'm going to make a new adjustment layer. I'm going to use the color balance. So I'm just seeing a little bit of, kind of looks a little bit yellow or red here in the shadows, and in these little, if you look at the silver parts, you can see that just definitely looks pretty warm. So I'm going to go in with my color balance. This can be difficult, so don't get discouraged. Just play with it a little bit. It's hard to get it right. Eyeballing color is pretty difficult, but as long as you can get it close, it'll look good. Don't worry if you feel like you're 1 or 2 points off, it's okay. But there we go. I think that looks a lot closer. So let's bring these up side by side. Let's go back to this one. That's before color balance, that's after. Much more spot on. Much, much better. So, all right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten those layers down. Let's go to flatten image. Okay, and we'll pull these all up side by side. So this is our final selection of images. So we went over how to adjust the tone and the exposure, how to bump up the colors, how to increase your saturation, how to crop, and we even went over a little bit of a healing brush tool there. Okay, so here are our 3 final images. We have 2 different flat lays and our light tent image. So we have a couple of different views. I'm pretty happy with the way that these turned out. I think the colors are pretty much exactly where I wanted them, which can be difficult in a bracelet like this with all of those multifaceted beads, and there's a lot of different colors in there to capture. So it can be a little bit difficult to capture the luminosity, but I think that we were able to do that today. So I would say that these are Etsy ready, and I'm going to call this a wrap. So thanks for learning how to edit with me.